Hello and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. I'm Holland and this is my best friend Tori.
Hi!
If you're new to our show, we rank various forms of entertainment by different categories out of a total score of 10, with only 2 points allowed for our personal taste. Don't worry, we break down everything as we go. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just find something new to enjoy. Just be sure to tread lightly. There will be hot takes and spoilers. Cut to the intro. Alrighty, so I have chosen, if you have not read the title, the topic I've chosen for today is Lemony Snicket's book, All the Wrong Questions, book 2 in the series called When Did You See Her Last?
It looked like this?
Yeah, so that's the first printing, I think. That's the first printing edition.
Yeah,
they have a new edition out now.
Oh.
Yeah, because we're so old. So this actually, I chose this for all of our podcast listeners. No offense, YouTube community, but we surprisingly, this was I think this was the second or third episode we ever recorded. Was our first, was book 1.
Series, yeah.
And it's suddenly become very popular on our podcast platforms. So we do look at our analytics and we try and cater to what you guys enjoy. So
if it's trending,
yeah,
we want to give you more.
Exactly. So I decided, let's go ahead and get into book 2. So if you are not familiar with book 1, go ahead and listen to that episode. We'll read it first because support the arts. And then go listen to our first episode of book 1 in season 1 and then read book 2 and then come back and listen to this. So here is some background information on kind of the series / book 2 for you if you're not familiar. All the Wrong Questions is a 4-part mystery series. There's also a companion book written by Lemony Snicket. It is set in a formerly seaside town called Stained by the Sea and features an almost 13-year-old Lemony Snicket attempting to unravel a conspiracy. So some background of the book. In 2009, Lemony Snicket revealed that the prequels do have some overlap with his prior series, A Series of Unfortunate Events, which you may be familiar with if you've seen the Netflix show or the film or read his book series as well.
My favorite books of all time, just to put that out there.
Yeah, but he did say in addressing this book series, it is not a continuation. His intention was that this new series is for older children. Older Children is about more experiences from Lemony Snicket's own life. It takes place at a time before the Baudelaire children were born. And it is a, quote, highly autobiographical account of Lemony Snicket's adolescence. The prequel series made its debut with book 1 on October 23rd, 2012. The first book was entitled Who Could That Be at This Hour? And the second book was released a year later on October 15th, 2013. The book is published by Little Brown Books for Young Readers. It's 304 pages. The reading age is listed as 8 years and up, and the grade level is grade 3 and up for U.S. schools. Sorry, all of you international listeners, I have no idea what the equivalent to that is in other schools. So, U.S. grade 3 and up, which is about 8 years old. The first book did get a few accolades. It won, it was listed as a Kirkus Best Book of the Year, a School Library Journal Best Book of the Year, and a New York Times Notable Children's Book of the Year. I couldn't find any accolades that subsequent books in this series were awarded, so that's just from the first book. This is a spoiler-free synopsis of this current book. So, and I can't remember where I pulled it from. Yeah, I can't remember if I pulled it from the back of the book because I didn't write my own citation here, but this is a synopsis. I should have asked the question, how could someone who was missing be in 2 places at once? Instead, I asked the wrong question. 4 wrong questions, more or less. This is the account of the second. And then that's Lemony Snicket speaking as the narrator. And then the remainder of the synopsis is, in the fading town of Stained by the Sea, young apprentice Lemony Snicket has a new case to solve when he and his chaperone, S. Theodora Markson, are hired to find a missing girl. Is the girl a runaway? Or was she kidnapped? Was she last seen at a grocery store? Or could she have stopped at the diner? Is it really any of your business? Are these all the wrong questions? So, there's your synopsis. If you have not read the book and would like to read it with fresh eyes and no spoilers, go ahead and click off now and come back when you've read it. But Tori's going to go ahead and kick us into our first category.
Okay, so it's been a while since we've done a book on the podcast. So just to give our categories a little bit more explanation. So for the first category for books, we allot up to 3 points, and that's for plot, story delivery, and world building. So this includes things like the pacing, if it's compelling, innovative, if it's cohesive, believability, plot holes, resolution, use of tropes, that sort of thing. As well as like just how the story is delivered to the audience. So that's kind of what encapsulates this category. So for me, out of 3 points, I gave this 2.5 points. I'm going to preface this episode and say I am a Lemony Snicket super fan, and I have been since I was very young. I read the first Lemony Snicket, A Series of Unfortunate Events book in 1999. So, I'm not going to out my age, but a long time I've been reading his books. And since then, since that series, I've just been a big fan of how Lemony Snicket writes, just like his style is very much my style as well. So I think that in regards to this book, one thing that I think when you come to a series that is really important is if it's been a long time since the reader has read the previous book in the series, I think it's very important to give contextual information, reminding or recapping what's happened so far in the story without simply like recapping. What I don't want in a book is for the first chapter to be like when you're watching like a show on Netflix and it's like on the last episode, and then it spends like 5 minutes just like showing you scenes. I don't want that from a book. I don't want you to just spend a chapter or half a chapter recapping, but I do need information given to me to help me remember where the characters are at, like what they're doing, and how any resolutions that have happened already sort of finished up. And I think that this book does an incredible job at like recapping the events up to this point. It reminds the reader without feeling cumbersome or like an info dump. It's also sprinkled very nicely. It's not just like the narration says this happened and then this happened and this happened and this happened and now we're here. You know, it's not like that. It's kind of like as the new chapter or new storyline is sort of beginning or gaining traction, events, people, locations that had been tied to events previous, it sort of reminds the reader like why that was important. For example, there is the location of the Black Cat coffee shop. The first time that the Black Cat coffee shop is mentioned again in this second book, the reader is reminded why that was a significant location in the first book. Not to say that like every event that happens in the first book at that location is listed, but enough of it is so that you can be like, oh yeah, I remember that, like, you know, this was a really important spot for this specific character, and this specific plot point happened here, and you know this plot twist occurred, and blah 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 blah. I just think that the way that everything is sort of tied from book 1 to book 2 is just done really really well. Also, one thing that I like, I'm a fan of mysteries in general. Pretty sure I've said that multiple times on this podcast, but one thing about a mystery is that I need to have some sort of level of suspicion on the characters that are suspicious or supposed to be suspicious. And I think that immediately this story does a really good job of sort of giving you these suspicious characters and giving us really good reasons to suspect them. I think there's like a really good level of cohesion to that, because with every revealed point or plot point. It ties things to things that we may have thought were insignificant before and continues to build suspicion onto different characters in different ways. It leads you, how do I want to phrase this? The story kind of leads you in a way that doesn't feel handholdy because it still assumes the reader is intelligent enough to put the puzzle pieces together. And I really like the way that is, I guess, framed. Or this story has all of the parts and pieces of a mystery. And I think that the way that they are packaged is in a way that is easy enough to follow if you are a young reader, but yet nuanced enough that as an adult, it's not like you're reading things and everything is incredibly obvious to you. And so finding that balance as an author writing a mystery is probably kind of tough. And I think that Lemony Snicket just nails it. As I think he nails most everything he writes, but that's neither here nor there. I was trying to think, I feel like when we talk about books a lot, I don't often talk a ton about like the use of tropes. So I spent some time kind of thinking like, does this story have any tropes? So the basic storyline, if I were to summarize this here, is that Lemony Snicket is trying to find a girl named Cleo Knight who has gone missing. And she is told to be a brilliant chemist who has come from a significant and wealthy family with lots of history in this town. And of course, their wealth has sort of diminished as the life of the town has also diminished. While looking for her, Lemony Snicket sort of discovers that her fate is also tied into the fate of the friend he made in the previous book, Ellington Faint, and her father's disappearance. And so it all kind of reveals to be sort of like connected and intertwined to each other. That's like the most basic rundown I could give of the story. And I was thinking about like, are there a lot of tropes? And while I feel like some characters could potentially be like tropes, and I'll maybe talk about that in characters, the only like big trope that I could think of was that like the villain is posing as like an innocent party and then is revealed to be the villain. Which sounds, when I say it that way, it sounds kind of juvenile. But I think the way that it is revealed is in a really, I don't know. I don't know the word I'm looking for, but I think to me, it did not come across as juvenile. It did not come across as like childish, the reveal. I wouldn't say that the reveal was necessarily the most shocking reveal, especially since like the last few minutes before the reveal are kind of, in my opinion, a little obvious, where the villain of Hangfire is, has been posing as this injured war hero that's, that lives at this clinic or whatever. And like those few minutes right before is kind of like, okay, this is obviously not right. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily like the plot twist of the century or anything like that. But I don't think I would go so far as to say that the trope is used in a like cheesy way. I think it's done in a way that feels appropriate to the story and the demographic that this is designed for. I know that I had just a minute ago sort of praised that like there's like that kind of balance between, being age appropriate, but also having a lot of appeal for adults. And I think that still is true. Just in thinking of things like tropes, I think that this is the only one that I could really identify well. And I think it thankfully does not come across as juvenile as it could in other books or stories. However, I didn't give it full points because I do think that while there is a little bit of a level of predictability toward the end, that the ending of the book does feel a little bit rushed and unsatisfying to me. I just think that the pacing of the book, while overall I think is great, and I think the pacing of this book is much better than the pacing of the first book, because I think that was a complaint that either one of us or both of us had with the first book, was that the pacing is just kind of like, okay, can we please get on with what we're doing? I think the pacing in this book is much, much better until we get to the end, where I feel like it gets, I wouldn't say it's messy, it just feels a little less, the momentum changes in a way that doesn't feel great, I guess, for me as a reader. I genuinely got to like, I don't know, 20, 25 pages left and felt like we still got a lot to cover. And yet it's all kind of wrapped up in those next like 20 to 25 pages, which I felt just a little unsatisfied at the end. So I don't think it's perfect, but I do think it's better. I think it's just a nicely little packaged. I know I didn't give a ton of info about the plot itself because I didn't, and I know that we already give like a spoiler warning, but I kind of just want to give enough that you want to go out and read it. I don't want to like recap the whole book to you. So that's why I was intentionally a little bit vague. But I know I don't have like long notes, but I just think that it's an improvement over the last book. I think it's perfectly packaged as a mystery and kind of hits all of the bullet points that you're looking for with a mystery. And I think it just kind of gets a little bit unsatisfying toward the end. So that's why I went with 2.5 points out of 3.
Cool. Okay. So I'm going to give some spoilers. So
that's fine.
This is your final warning. But for plot, story delivery, and world building, I actually also gave this 2.5 points out of 3. I went back and forth a little bit between like 2 or 2.5 points, and I kind of settled on 2.5 points. And I'll kind of explain kind of where I differentiated that kind of half a point later. But overall, I agree. The pacing of this book feels so much better than the first story. The world building, it still feels very cohesive, especially when you compare it to the prior novel. And even when you compare it to Lemony Snicket's other work, it still feels very much like the same world, the same universe, similar rules and, expectations apply to the world as a whole. I like that we get some new locations in this book. We get a lot of new characters, and yet they all still feel like they belong and fit in this town, in this small town. They feel like members of the community that are actually supposed to be there and have been integrated into that world for a long time. I don't particularly like when books introduce new characters and they feel like maybe you're reading, I don't know, maybe like in this instance, you're reading a mystery novel and all of a sudden this character feels like they came out of a comic book, like an action adventure comic book. And you're like, well, this person doesn't feel like they belong. And that wasn't the intention. The author almost got bored with their own work and then introduced somebody that doesn't feel like they fit. So that is not the case in this story, and I do appreciate that. I have the same note as you. I like that this picks up where book 1 leaves off, and yet it gives you little bites of exposition as you go. It, like you said, it doesn't info dump. So I also really appreciated that. I like that it is continuing the mystery of the prior book with Hangfire, with Ellington's father being missing, with, what is the abominating beast used for? All of that is still part of this story. It's not like we opened up a new case file and are like reading, I don't know, something like an Encyclopedia Brown book where none of the mysteries are connected to the prior story. You're just reading it's like a new case file has been opened. You're starting a new, I can't think of the word, but it's not a series, it's just like an individual story.
It's not mystery of the week.
Right, exactly. Or like a Nancy Drew novels. Right. Like they're all individual
Everything is
stories.
like self-contained within that one story.
Exactly. I think that overall the stakes of this story are much better and much more interesting than the previous book. I think that in the first book, it felt more like this MacGuffin, like we're looking for this Maltese Falcon object and we don't know what it's for or what it does, but this is the MacGuffin we're trying to obtain. And now here we have what I feel like is a much more mature and more engaging stakes. This is a young person that is missing.
Mm-hmm.
And this individual not only seems to be like a very clever, intelligent, admirable person, but this individual that's missing also has a solution to a really big problem. And so there is in the story, you find out that Cleo Knight is the person that's missing, and she's developing invisible ink, which in the context of this mystery could be one, very lucrative for her family that owns the ink making business of Stained by the Sea, and the ink that the source of their ink has gone away, and so now this would save the town with a new source of ink, being invisible ink that's created by Cleo, who's a chemist. And yet, so here now this is a potentially very lucrative solution for the town as a whole, but then it also has the potential for great evil because the villains want to utilize this new invention to do nefarious things, which we still at the end of the story don't fully understand what that is. But I do like that we have this one individual with a very powerful opportunity for both quote unquote good and evil in the surrounding world of the story. I think it's a very interesting story and it's a very engaging story, and yet it still fits the tone of Lemony Snicket's world, where it's not like somebody has found the cure for cancer. That would be a very real and grounded, solution, which obviously we can see very real stakes for. They've invented invisible ink,
right,
which in a sense sounds very silly, but in the world it fits very well because Lemony Snicket's part of this secret organization, and what are they up to? We don't really know at this point, so nothing is as it seems. It fits that tone, and yet we are given enough compulsion as a reader to have buy-in that, oh, this is really important. And all of that's presented to us very, very well, and I appreciated that. I like that the wrong question of the title, when did you see her last, was introduced very early, and we're given kind of teasers as to when these questions will be asked and why they're poor questions. It gives us some intrigue into the story and kind of gets us pulled into the story very well. I also think the kind of villain of this story, we have kind of the villain in the Tower of Hangfire, which we don't know a lot about, but we also later meet in this story. I like that. And then we also have kind of our minor villain of Dr. Flammarion, who's this evil doctor, which I think is always a great villain character to have. It is tropey. I would say that he is probably a really big trope. Character trope in this story is an evil doctor but I think it's also a very powerful villain because we assume that a doctor is going to have our best interests at heart. They're supposed to be healing us. And now this doctor seems to have very ill intentions. And we don't just have that as an off-screen representation. I like that in this story, we're seeing the connection of this doctor drugging Cleo's parents, which sounds very, very dark for a children's novel, but it's told in a way that's not traumatizing to a young reader. And yet I also like how that was tied into Lemony Snicket's identification of that as a character is tied into the first book with him identifying what laudanum is. So this cohesion throughout both books are really, really good. And I really liked that a lot. I'll go over some other positives before I get to some of the negatives. I do, I think that especially in chapter 7, the kind of reveal of we think that it's Cleo behind this door. Lemony Snicket goes and he thinks he's followed the nurse who is holding Cleo, and we have this slow reveal of who's who is there. We think it's Cleo, and then we find out it's Ellington disguised as Cleo. And I like that this reveal, the pacing of this is just really slow and gradual, and it doesn't feel drawn out. It doesn't feel like we're just, you strung us along for half a chapter and, it wasn't a satisfying payoff. I felt like the way that this book kind of unfolds, this suspension of a mystery, and then we get the answer. We get that satisfying answer that, oh, this wasn't Cleo, and we got some clues along the way that it wasn't Cleo, and then when we find out it is Ellington, we can connect that to the kind of clues we were given along the way.
Yeah, that's like, that kind of ties into like my note that I mentioned where I love the level of cohesion where like every time, not every time, but oftentimes when like a plot point is revealed, it ties into something that we thought was insignificant.
Yeah.
And like, I really like that. And also, now that I'm thinking about it, that's actually kind of a trope too. The borrowed identity trope.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
And I didn't think about that till just now.
Yep. That is kind of a mystery trope.
Like somebody's borrowed identity.
Yep.
Ellington poses as Cleo.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I think it's done very well.
Yeah,
Again, it's done very well and very tastefully. Chapter 8, I like that when we're finding, we're getting more information, and yet it's unfolding in the characters' dialogue. So this back and forth dialogue between the two of them, we like find things out as we're reading, as if we're watching a film and seeing these two characters talk about something. And as they realize the unveiling of the mystery, we are also witnessing that, instead of just getting straight exposition from your narrator character explaining point blank, your bulleted list. I like that it's done very organically between characters' conversations. And then I also think that kind of we have these stakes of Cleo being missing and being kidnapped, and then actually it's not Cleo, it's Ellington, and Cleo is still missing, and Ellington, is pretending to come up with invisible ink because the villains are holding her and she has no idea what she's doing. But then where is Cleo? She's trying to develop her formula. And then we go and go talk to who we think is the colonel. We find out it's Hangfire, and then, he gets away. That whole progression of the plot, I think could be all be very chaotic. But one thing I did like about it is we have this kind of smaller, immediate stakes or tension of Cleo being missing. And then as we're finding Cleo, which seems to be the objective, we're also unveiling what is Hangfire's plan, like the underbelly of his plan. And Lemony Snicket sees, child-size chains attached to beds with no children. And then there's chains attached to tables. And he discovers that Hangfire is going to be having children kept as prisoners, which is again extremely dark for a children's story, but it's unveiled in a way that again is not traumatizing for your younger readers, but is it's almost like the more mature you are, the more traumatizing it is.
I think it's because it's like, as you get older, this is going to sound really dark, so forgive me, but like as you get older, you become less naive to the fact that there is like evil in the world, and evil people. And so what may be odd, strange, or off-putting to a child is something that an adult can look at and be like, this is like evil. Like, this is nothing but harm intended in this case. And so I think it just comes with like, unfortunately, like the experience of just like living and understanding that like there is so much bad in the world. And so what could be like a child being like, I don't like that, is for an adult like, we must avoid this at all costs kind of thing. Right. And it's like that difference.
Yeah. And understanding it as an adult, you see this is so much darker than how I could have understood it as a child. Like I just didn't have the capacity to understand how sinister this villain really is, whereas a child, you see it with a lot more innocence as like, oh, this is a bad guy, this is a bad man, and as an adult you're like, no, this is an evil man, so I like that there's a nice balance of not making it too dark and keeping it age appropriate while still having enough underlying
that nuance.
Right. It's sinister enough that as an adult you're like, oh, this is a really bad dude. This is a bad guy. So I appreciated that aspect of the storytelling. I think it made overall for a very interesting plot. I did have a couple negatives, which I didn't give this full points. A couple things. I know that Lemony Snicket is... I think a trope in his work, which I don't necessarily have a personal problem with. I don't have a problem as a reader. I understand that a lot of his work has this as an overarching story point. But Lemony Snicket's original novels, and I would say these novels as well, they often have this concept that the children are the intelligent, clever, ingenuity. They have the ingenuity. They have the gusto to accomplish what they need to accomplish, and the adults are the complete bumbling buffoons.
Like every adult.
Every
it's not
adult.
Even just like some, but it's like every adult is
right.
an idiot.
And unless they are a villain, and then they are clever and evil. But if they are on any side that is not the villain, they're incompetent and complete morons. I think at this point in Lemony Snicket's work, it's overdone. And I have some notes to that in characters, but specifically in this story where I think it negatively affects the plot is in chapter 5. We spend all this time reestablishing how stupid the officers Mitchum are, how deceived they are by their own kid, and how the bumbling cop trope, which is a huge character trope that I think is way overplayed and overdone. I think it's extremely low-hanging fruit. And I don't really have a problem with it until Lemony Snicket, the character, decides I think that it's way too long, this back and forth dialogue they have about how dumb they are and how much they're arguing about something that's irrelevant, and their son is pulling the wool over their eyes again, and they're just going back and forth, and they're fighting over who gets to drive the cop car. It takes so long, which I understand. If I was a 3rd grader / 8-year-old, I would think it's hilarious.
Yeah.
So I understand I am not the target demographic, but I also don't think an 8-year-old needs a story about children being chained to a table to work for an evil villain to be entertained either. So you gotta have the balance there. I understand that. But I think we spend all this time reestablishing the cops as these bumbling idiots, and then Lemony Snicket recruits them to help. Why? He knows how dumb and incompetent they are. We literally watch them put a hat on a filing cabinet in a police lineup. And then Lemony Snicket goes, let me unfold to you the danger that Cleo's parents are in, and the doctor's evil. You should go investigate that. Why? You know they're not going to do a good job. You know they're not going to actually help you or do anything. Why did we waste almost an entire chapter reestablishing that these cops are idiots, and then Lemony Snicket gives them a charge to help with the mystery? Like, it makes no sense to me. I feel like you could have taken that chapter completely out of the story. It's a complete waste of storytelling, I think, because either we should see my kind of script doctor, we should see some semblance that the cops have a little bit of competence. Maybe they got one thing right, and Lemony Snicket goes, all right, I'm running out of options. I have nobody else that can help me. Or, he should have sent them just on a wild goose chase to get him out of the way. And he doesn't do that. He actually gives them information to go. He gives him a large chunk of his plan and then asks for them to help.
Right.
I just thought that part of the story was just ridiculous. And Lemony Snicket also finds that Stu, their son, gives clues that he's working for Hangfire. So then why would you tell him all your plans?
Yeah.
When you're on the trail of the villain, why would you tell your plans to a child who's giving you very, very obvious clues that he's working with the villain?
Yeah.
So none of that made any sense. It made it look like Lemony Snicket is the idiot here.
Right.
And I really didn't like that at all. I thought that was a big flaw in the plot. And I'm sure people are going to be like, no, he had to have the cops go so they could get distracted. And then Ellington could break out of the cell and all this. Like, but you didn't have to like have Lemony Snicket try and recruit them for his cause. Like, you could send S. Theodora Markson on any wild goose chase, and she's out of the picture for the majority of this book.
Right.
Which is fine because she's not necessary for the plot.
Right.
But then why reestablish that your cops are morons? And, it would make more sense for Lemony Snicket to try and recruit the librarian for help, which, so anyways, I thought that was just ridiculous. I also there was a part where, a couple like more minor things. The fact that a syringe needle punctured the tire of the Dilemma, the car. A syringe needle is not big enough to puncture a car tire. I thought that was a little goofy, but I understand like, oh, it's just a fun kid's story, but like everything else works really hard to be kind of have that aspect of realism. I thought that was a little goofy. That was just me being me. I was like, a syringe needle couldn't puncture a car tire like that. It would bend the needle, but okay. Unless you have like an elephant tranquilizer that you're, using. A couple things I didn't, maybe I missed it. So you correct me if I'm wrong, Tori. Maybe I just missed this. But when they're at Black Cat Coffee, Ellington and Lemony Snicket are at Black Cat Coffee, and they're sitting there at the bar or whatever, like drinking coffee. And I think that's when the cops and S. Theodora Markson come in, and here Ellington has been able to fool everybody to think that she's Cleo, and nobody there thinks that Ellington is Cleo. Why? This person has missing posters everywhere, and they walk in and have this long conversation with Ellington, and nobody says, oh wait, you're Cleo Knight, we found you.
Well, is it because she's no longer wearing Cleo's outfit, because she changes and wears Lemony's jacket to leave the apartment,
and then she gives it back to him?
Right, but my assumption was that she was not in Cleo's clothes anymore. Like, she'd be in her own clothes.
No, she was. I'm pretty sure. I don't think they don't ever say that she wasn't, but she still has blonde hair.
Yeah.
And is dressed like Cleo. She just put Lemony's jacket over her.
So I guess my assumption as the reader was that she was not dressed like Cleo at that moment.
Yeah.
She was back in her own clothes.
But then I feel like later they make a comment that they later on make a comment about her looking similar to Cleo. I don't know. I just felt like it was a very...
I don't remember, but if it's not clear enough for you, then it's probably not clear enough for other people too.
Yeah.
So
that I thought was very odd. It was like they forgot that she was dressed like Cleo. It was just until it was a plot convenience point. And then the other thing that I could not figure out, how do we know that the next step for Lemony Snicket to go to after, how do we ever get to the point where Lemony Snicket knows that Cleo is being held at the clinic? What spurs him to go to the clinic next?
I think he's just trying to find the I think he's either trying to find Dr. Flammarion for just information, or he's trying to find the war hero guy.
Because he goes to the clinic specifically to look for Cleo. Because he takes the flowers and he has Moxie go with him, and they pretend that they're going to visit. And they walk in with the flowers because they're going to go try and find... They say they're going to visit the Colonel, but then Lemony's going to look around to find Cleo.
Let's see if I can find an explanation.
So I couldn't figure that out either. All of a sudden, I'm reading along, and next thing I know, we're at the clinic looking for Cleo. And I'm like, who said Cleo was going to be there? Nobody can find her. That's the problem.
So, Cleo Knight's Dilemma is parked a block away with a flat tire. I think the family apothecary grabbed her.
So why would
She's in the clutches of a doctor named Flammarion.
Yeah. So why is he at the clinic? He used to work at the clinic, but he's been living and working with the Knights.
Did he say he'd been living there?
Or he'd been there.
I think he just comes by.
We've never seen him at any point at the clinic. Except I think at one point they loosely connect him saying that he was I think it was Hangfire in disguise that said that Dr. Flammarion was treating one patient at the clinic.
Oh, you're right. For years, he worked at the Colophon Clinic just outside town before coming here to treat the Knights. But it doesn't say he lives there, just that he...
So before, he used to work at the clinic. So then why would we assume...
Yeah, no, that's a plot hole.
Yeah.
That is a plot hole.
I just felt like, okay, we think the doctor has her. I got that point.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, it must be at the clinic. Why?
Yeah.
I mean, it would be different if it was like, oh, the apothecary lives at the clinic, or that's where he works.
Or still practices out.
Yeah. But
that's a good point.
Yeah. So a couple things there. I felt like as I was reading, I was kind of like, well, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then especially that whole point with the cops that I just really didn't like. I thought it was very inconsistent. So that's why I didn't give it full points. So 2.5 points out of 3.
Okay. So our next category for books is quality of writing. So this includes things like vocabulary, grammar, humor, dialogue, length, pacing, style, complexity, formatting, even things like editing and typos is all included.
And this is obviously unique to our books category.
Right.
Because, and when we were creating our scoring system, we agreed that you can have a beautifully written book and the plot can be absolute crap, and vice versa. Yeah. So we wanted to have our own category for it.
So we only allot 1 point for this, but I gave this a full point. I never ever get bored with Snicket's style of writing. I think that I love the way he can balance between like clear vocabulary without making it feel like you're listening to like Shakespeare or just like flowery nonsense. Like he's very intentional with his vocabulary, but when you're 12 or 13 reading this book, you're learning words or reading words maybe for the first time. And I think he does a really fun job, a fun way of whenever he does introduce sort of like an uncommon vocabulary word, he always says which is a word that here means, and it's not a perfect like dictionary description of what that word means, but it's always like a clever way. He also describes things really well. I actually want to pull one from the top of my head here. It's when they meet Dr. Flammarion, and he describes the way that he looks. So this is the description of Dr. Flammarion, okay? A round little man was gazing at all of us through round little glasses. He had a small beard on his chin that looked like it was trying to escape from his nasty smile. He looked like the sort of person who would tell you that he did not have an umbrella to lend you when he actually had several and simply wanted to see you get soaked. That last sentence describes nothing about his physical appearance, and yet it is so descriptive that you know exactly what he's talking about. And it's like, it's descriptive enough to be like clear while still leaving enough to the reader's imagination to like fill in the holes of creativity. And I just think that Lemony Snicket has such a creative writing style in that way. He uses words and combinations of words to describe things that like I would never think to do on my own. I think that I already kind of talked about how the pacing I think is a huge improvement from the first book. And I think that overall the length of these books is kind of perfect for their demographic. I think that I get kind of tired when I see like kids chapter books and they're like 80 pages. And I'm like, okay, well maybe that's appropriate for a 6-year-old. But if this book is going to start at 8, I think an 8-year-old can handle this. And I wish that other book series...
show them the font size too. It's not like you're reading tiny little... Yeah. There you go.
Font size.
Yeah.
So I just think that like it's a perfect opportunity for a child to feel like they are accomplishing a good sized book for their age. I read the whole thing in probably 3.5 total hours, maybe 4. And I was pausing a lot to make notes. I would say probably a 12-year-old, this is probably a 6 or 8 hour read. And that's fine. I think it's, when I was that age, I wanted to read books that I felt like I was like, that were like significant in size. I don't know, something about the size, I think, and like length of the story, I think is just perfect. Because it doesn't turn away an adult reader either. You don't pick this up and go, oh, this is, a 20-minute read. Like, so I think that it's just perfectly balanced in that way. He also does really fun things with like some formatting sometimes. Like there's the end of a chapter. I don't remember which chapter it is, but he's like, and it sounded like, or it looked like, and it's literally just like blank pages.
Did I write that down? Yeah, it's pretty early in the story.
It's pretty early. It's the end of chapter 3. It says, after several minutes of exposing the paper to heat, I looked at it and read what it had to say. And then you literally get 2 entirely blank pages with an ending of, in other words, nothing. And so, like, some people could say, well, that was just like a waste of 2 pages. But I think it's really clever formatting. And it gives, especially because the way that, like, it's just 2 blank pages. It's not like the words from the previous page like bled over. So you turn the page thinking, oh my gosh, something really cool. Oh, it's just nothing. So I think it kind of just adds to this feeling of being, of like learning along with the narrator. I'll talk about this a little bit more in characters too, but I like that everything is written from Lemony Snicket's perspective, this sort of first person perspective, and that you, maybe this is also kind of a plot note. I don't know if this, I actually don't know where this falls. I'm talking about it in quality of writing because I think it falls under perspective, but I like that we learn when and how Lemony does. And we know what Lemony knows because he shares that with us. And so, and as a narrator, some things are withheld. Maybe this does fall more into plot, and I should have talked about it then. Some things are withheld because it's like he's kind of sharing his thoughts with you, and there are some thoughts he continues to keep secret. So there is still like a level of mystery to the narration. But I like kind of this idea of like, as we're seeing things, it's because Lemony is seeing them and experiencing them. It feels, at least for me as a reader, like my perspective is matching that of the narrator, and I'm not having to try to like understand the narrator. It just feels like a very natural sort of perspective, just the way that it's written. So I really like, I can't really say anything bad about the quality of writing. I love the vocabulary. I love his humor. Snicket humor is just so funny to me. It's kind of dry sometimes, but like I think it's just so funny, so clever. He, like I said, descriptive words, everything. Pacing is better. Dialogue is funny. I have nothing bad to say. Full points for quality of writing.
You're probably going to be sad.
Okay.
But I only gave this half a point out of 1 for quality of writing. And I think that in the first book, I gave it full points for quality of writing.
I don't remember.
But I do think in the same way that this story, I think, did really well continuing the plot of the first book, I think there are some parts where it's a bit lacking, and I'll kind of talk about that with my scoring. Also, I forgot to mention in the plot, another reason I kind of took half a point off, and I don't particularly like this. This is going to I'm going to get all the hate for this. I don't particularly like this C or D or E plot of Lemony Snicket's sister digging under the ground.
Interesting.
I think my take on it, I think it is just fan service. I don't think that it tells us anything more about Lemony Snicket, and it doesn't tell us anything more about the plot. And I think that it's just, seems to me, at least at this point, at this juncture, because we're only doing the first 2 books, maybe more will be revealed later. Honestly, I've not finished the series, but right now it just seems like fan service, and I'm not a huge fan of that. So that's I forgot to say that in plot. That's a hot take, if you will. But quality of writing.
I don't agree, but that's fine.
I do think overall that I agree with a lot of the points you made. Actually, a majority of what you said I also had written down. So I do like that this has this consistent noir film feel of the story. It kind of has this like melancholy kind of, dark and stormy night, rainy clouds kind of tone without it ever feeling overly depressing or sad or like a downer. You don't ever feel like your main characters have a lack of hope or a lack of drive. It all feels like bad things are happening, but we're have the ability to push through and figure this out. And I like that overall as a tone for kind of your story and your characters as well. I do think I like how Lemony Snicket's humor is very subtle. It's very intelligent and kind of like, I think you may have mentioned this in our last episode as well. Lemony Snicket does not insult the intelligence of his reader. He assumes that kids that are reading this story are smart enough to follow along and like keep up.
Right.
And I appreciate that in this story. I like the way he defines words. I wrote that as well. I like that I took a note about the blank pages, how that's essentially storytelling and an illustration at the same time, which it's a blank page. I think it's surprising. It surprises you pleasantly. I also like on page, between page 69 and 71, Tori has her only copy, the illustration on that page. I like the illustrations and the use of illustrations in this story. The illustration there is Lemony Snicket getting the haircut by Moxie, and he says in the story, I hope nobody illustrates this.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just very clever. It's very like humorous. He says, I hope there isn't an illustration. He keeps with his very distinct writing style. His description is really good. I like that he conveys feeling with visuals, like you said about Dr. Flammarion not giving you an umbrella, even though he has several. I wrote, there's a line, I think it's very close to the beginning, but I forgot to write the page number down, but he said something, page 45. He says, it was the color of somebody buying you an ice cream.
So talking about the dilemma, which is Cleo Knight's car, it was one of the newer models with a small old-fashioned horn perched just outside each front window and a shiny crank on the side so you could roll down the roof if staying by the sea ever offered pleasant weather, and it was the color of someone buying you an ice cream cone for no reason at all.
Yeah. I just think that's just, you get this perfect picture of like the most pleasant color, and it's not a color. He doesn't tell you what color it is at all, but it gives you that, it evokes that emotion in you of like, oh, this is just really pleasant. Somebody buying you an ice cream for no reason is like the best thing ever. So all of those, I agree with all of those positives. However, the reason I did not give this full points, and I factored this into this, I'm going to kind of give you a little disclaimer here. I factored this into both the quality of writing and the characters because I think it applies to both. I think that this book series, compared to A Series of Unfortunate Events, Lemony Snicket is the narrator in both of those stories. In A Series of Unfortunate Events, he's the narrator, but he's telling you about other people. And so the revelation of the characters are from his observations and his perspectives of these characters. This story is first person narrative. He is the narrator and it is his story that he's telling you. And I don't think he takes advantage of the first person narrator. I think this book is written as if he is the third person narrative. He is just the main character. And I think he's doing himself a disservice in developing and unveiling the character of Lemony Snicket by being that first person narrator, and it's a story about himself. I think that there's so much, I will talk about this in characters as well, but the revelation of Lemony Snicket, you don't find anything about Lemony Snicket's internal monologue in any internal monologue. It is all given to you in dialogue. You don't find out anything about Lemony Snicket and who he is as a character until he is talking with somebody else. And then you start to see who is our narrator. We don't ever know that. We don't ever know, like, I won't say ever, but we really don't. I don't think Lemony Snicket capitalizes on the fact that he is the first person narrator, and he doesn't seem to give you the kind of internal monologue and thought process and worries and concerns in the way that you would want from a first person narrator perspective. He gives you all of those things from a third person narrator perspective. So like when Lemony Snicket is talking to Moxie or Ellington about his concerns or how he's processing through a mystery or how he figures things out or how he feels about something, it's all in this dialogue setting. And I think that's fine. That's a great way to unveil a character and to unfold a story to you. But when I read a story and it's first person narrator, I expect to get a very, for lack of better words, a very intimate understanding of my narrator. And I think Lemony Snicket's objective as an author is to keep Lemony Snicket a bit mysterious. So he has to withhold from you a lot of that inner intricacies and that quote unquote intimacy that a reader has with a first person narrator. He has to withhold that from you, or Lemony Snicket will not be a mystery anymore. And I think that that's part of the appeal of Lemony Snicket, that he is a bit mysterious. So while I think that it's Lemony Snicket's right as an author to present you the main character this way, I think it's a disservice in that first person narrator format. And I think that if you're going to have a first person narrator, you need to give your reader a bit more transparency with your narrator.
So what I'm gathering is that like you almost wish that there was like more of a level of vulnerability that you get from Lemony as the first person in your head, you in his head narrator.
Right. And as the first person narrator, you're never in his head while he's narrating to you. He will reveal things to you if he is giving you the transcription of his dialogue between him and another character, but he never lifts the curtain enough to actually let you be in his mind while he's thinking through something or worried about something or processing through something or thinking about his sister. He's like, I read a letter and this is what the letter says. He doesn't ever tell you, this is a memory I had, this is something that I hope for or I wish for, or none of that is given to you in the way that you would expect from that first person narrative perspective. And so I kind of factored that into my score of quality of writing and character development. And again, it is Lemony Snicket as an author. It is his right to present this story however he wants because he's the author. But I do think that it is, it's not giving you what most first person narration stories give the audience. I think there is a level of expectation as a reader that if I'm reading something from this first person narrator perspective, I'm given a bit more transparency to my narrator. I'm given some, behind the curtain, some just a more, again, I can't think of a better word, but a more intimate relationship with my main character compared to the other characters. And I think that overall we know just as much about Lemony as we do about Moxie, as we do about Ellington, because we don't get any additional insight into who Lemony Snicket is through that first person narrator perspective. So that's why I think that is more of a technical critique in quote unquote quality of writing and characters. So I'm not giving in any way knocking Lemony Snicket, but I think in pure objective perspective of writing style and on a technical level, I think that that's why I deducted half a point kind of from each category. And I'll talk a little bit more when we get into characters, but that was kind of my summation of why I didn't give it full credit.
Okay. So our next category is characters, and we allot 3 points for this for books. So for me, I gave this 2 out of 3 points. I think that I don't disagree with what you said about Lemony's and the whole perspective thing. I guess it doesn't bother me, nor do I think it's necessarily a detraction. So I guess it's just different perspectives. But
and that's why we have this podcast.
That's why we have this podcast. But I just wanted to kind of address that, since that was kind of like a linked note between two categories.
Yeah, sure.
So I wanted to talk about that first. I think that we have our established cast, and then we have our new cast that comes in for this book. And I like a lot of the new characters that they introduce. To summarize, we've got
we're just talking new characters.
Just talking new characters. We got Cleo Knight.
Her parents.
We got their maids, Zada and Zora.
Mm-hmm.
We have Dr. Flammarion. We have his nurse, who is good with a knife, as she says like 4 times. We have Jake Hicks and Hungry, his aunt. Am I missing anybody new?
Polly Partial.
Is she new?
I don't remember.
I feel like she's mentioned in the first book, but maybe.
Well, we get. I don't know. I don't know.
Whatever.
Maybe
she's
she might be
a little
new.
bit more prevalent in this book than in the first book.
Yep.
And then our established.
No, the Colonel.
The Colonel. Right. Yep. The Colonel.
He is
Colonel
a character,
Colophon.
and he has a history.
And he
So,
has a
like,
history.
we have the real character, and then the secret villain.
Am I missing anybody else?
Let me see if I wrote anybody else down.
I have somebody else, but I don't want to mention them yet.
Okay. That's all I have.
Okay. So that's our new cast. That's quite a bit.
That's
for
a lot.
New characters.
It was a lot of characters.
I like most of them. Not to say that I think they're great people or anything. Do not misunderstand. I just think that every character that they introduce feels natural to their environment. Feels like they fit in the world and the context of their career and or purpose in the story. I don't think that necessarily any character, while some characters are obviously more prevalent than others, like Jake Hicks becomes a more prevalent character than his Aunt Hungry, but his Aunt Hungry the introduction of her kind of leads into the introduction of him. So she serves a purpose while not a huge one. I think that each character that's introduced does serve the purpose that they are supposed to serve. And I personally think that none of those new characters are present for longer than they need to be, which I think is
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
Because like Zada and Zora, they meet them in the beginning. They have basically the establishing conversation happens with Zada and Zora, and then they're referenced the rest of the time. They don't come back and give us more exposition and dialogue that doesn't really help or whatever. It's not like you go back and you have your check-ins with these characters. Like none of that. They're done. Cleo's parents, we have one conversation with them, we never see him again.
I feel like that's a great point, because I feel like that is a huge flaw in other forms of media, that we gotta keep Zada and Zora and make them like have tea with Lemony later, and
I just find it to be, I'm glad that Lemony Snicket didn't do it this way, because I think if he had tried to keep characters around for longer than they can serve a decent purpose, it would have felt so clogged down with characters. And I think it would give us less of an opportunity to care about the characters that we really should be caring about, because they're just lost in the rigmarole of all the dialogue and characters, and we need to have these big scenes with 9 characters in a room and they're all talking. We got to make sure dialogue is evenly dispersed. And like I personally cannot stand it when media feels like they must do that. Like,
gotta give everybody their screen time.
We don't, though. We don't.
Right.
It's okay to have the little guys come on, do their small bit part, and leave. And I think that
there are no small parts.
So anyway,
only short people like Tori. Which is funny because you don't know how tall either of us are.
True.
So, although
just boxes on a screen.
Although our photo is on our website, you can see our height
true,
difference. So, fun facts.
But anyway, so I think that the new characters are introduced, kept around, and, for lack of a better term, disposed of properly.
Ooh, that's a strong
word.
Harsh,
but you know what I mean, in regards to their role in the story. Now let's talk about our established cast. We still have quite a big established cast. Obviously, we have Lemony. We have his mentor, S. Theodora Markson. We've got
Chaperone.
Chaperone.
She's not a mentor.
Sorry, Chaperone. We've got the Mitchums and their son Stu. We've got QWERTY. We got Prosper Lost. We got Moxie and her father, who is not seen but referenced a lot. We have
Pip and Squeak.
Pip and Squeak. We have Ellington Faint and her unseen father at this point. We have the villain of Hangfire. I don't think I missed anybody.
I'm trying to think too, because we do have a large cast in this story. Cast.
And again, thank goodness we have writing in such a way where characters make their entrance, they serve their purpose, and they exit stage right. And it's always in such a way that it feels natural, it feels purposeful, it feels intentional, and it does not like mess or blur anything that we should be focusing on. I just think it's done really well. It has such the potential to be a mess with this many characters. Thank goodness it is not. However, here's a downside. I do think that while most, not all, because I will give some specific notes, most of our established cast is consistent, there's not much growth that happens in our established cast. S. Theodora Markson is the same as she was at the very beginning of the very first book, and she stays that way through the very end of this book. And while her role is sort of unhelpful, dismissive, egotistical, lazy lady, like that's kind of her role. That's the character of who she is. So while she is consistent in that, I'm glad she didn't have a bigger role in this book, because I think she would have gotten boring. I already think she like tiptoes on the edge of boring, I think, in this book, because we already know what she's going to say, how she's going to react, how she's going to treat Lemony in almost everything.
You know who she's like? She's Mr. Poe.
She is this series' Mr. Poe. She shows up, she doesn't do anything helpful, she thinks she knows best, and she moves on.
Yeah.
And then she just disappears.
That's it. So she serves the same purpose as Mr. Poe.
Yeah, that's a good analogy there. Even characters like Ellington Faint, I think, unfortunately, we don't see a lot of growth. Her goal is still the same as it was in book 1. And while we get the opportunity to understand how and why she made some of the decisions that she made toward the end of book 1 and in book 2 to lead her to the point where Lemony finds her again. So I think she's understandable and we get a chance to understand her. I'm not sure how much change happens.
I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. I think that I think I could probably, I didn't necessarily agree when I was taking my notes, but I think I could probably agree with your point in the sense that I don't think we watch Ellington change. We just find out more about her.
Right.
And so while I would agree, you can argue that's not growth, that's just revelation.
Sure.
I do agree. I think we needed to see a little bit of change and maturing as we watch her respond to the happenings of this story.
And the reason I think I craved a little bit of growth in Ellington is because she's not a new character.
Right.
We've already had an entire book to kind of understand her. Now this is where I want the growth. And I guess you could argue that she's missing for half of the second book with no indication really of where she's gone. So you could say, you know,
she's off screen.
She's off screen. She doesn't get the opportunity. Like, okay, I'm not going to argue that point. That's a valid point. But because she is presented as a character that means more to Lemony than he expected, I think they need to do that. I think, you know, Snicket needs to write Ellington in a way that makes us care that much about her too. and want to root for her that much more. Not to say that we don't. I think we do. I don't think she's presented as like we just flippantly read about Ellington Faint and like don't give a crap about her and her father. I'm not claiming that. I'm just saying, if you want us to keep our stakes in Ellington Faint and her goal, like, I need to see something happening within her. It doesn't have to be massive. It doesn't have to be show-stopping. It doesn't have to be the focus of an entire chapter, but I need to see moments. And I felt like I didn't really see many moments with her. I think the biggest moment, potentially, is when Lemony finds her. They're trying to figure out how to get her out of this apartment where she's been posing as Cleo. But this really isn't even an Ellington note. It's more of a Lemony note. And he just says to her something along the lines of, you know, you're very brave and clever. Like, you did all of this to help Cleo Knight. So, and she has like this moment where she just kind of like soaks in what he says and then just kind of gently accepts it. And I think it's a nice character moment. I really do. She doesn't try to fight him on it or anything like that. She just kind of like accepts that moment. And I'm like, okay, cool. And I thought it was kind of like a ghost of what was coming, and we don't get any other moments like that. And I understand that the story kind of changes focus to be more about Cleo, and even really like Jake Hicks becomes a bigger character toward the very end of the book. So the focus is a little bit more on them. But if she's going to stay an established member, I want to know more about her. I don't remember if I had this. I honestly don't remember if I had this opinion when we did the first book or not. It's been a long time since I've listened to that episode. But I think a more interesting character, established character, is Moxie. And while Moxie
I think you did have that opinion. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to bump the mic.
Mm-hmm.
I think you did have that opinion of Moxie last time, that you thought she was much more developed than Ellington.
I think even Moxie kind of suffers from the not any real growth in this book. I think that her grit and her cleverness take a little bit more of a role in this book. And I actually really like the scene where Moxie and Lemony are at the library doing research, and Lemony leaves without telling Moxie. And, you know, the rigmarole happens. He comes back, and she's just like standing outside of the library, just like ticked off.
Just fuming at him.
Just fuming. And I think it's one of the best Moxie moments, because we don't ever really see that from her before that moment. And so it's a nice, like, new side. So while thinking about this, like, who grew, who didn't, I wouldn't say that Moxie necessarily grew, but I think in this book we got an opportunity to see a new side of her, which I think is helpful in the established cast. So I don't have a ton more notes. Those are just a few examples, but I think that's the reason why I couldn't go full point, or I had to take a full point off and only give 2/3 credit, is because the cast is so large. And while I think they do a great job of serving their purpose, I think that as the series continues, if you're going to continue to have your established cast be involved in the rest of the story, I want to see growth. I want to see learning. I want to see new skills being learned, taught, and then put to use, something like that. And I just feel like everybody's just using their own skill set that they already know and came into the story with. And while that's cool, everybody has their own purpose and place and, you know, job to do. What about, I don't know. I just find it more interesting in a series like this when you have characters who are not equipped for this and they have to figure it out. And that's just not present. Everybody is equipped walking in some way, or somebody in the group is equipped. And I feel like it would just be a more interesting character, I guess, revelation, growth, whatever you want to call it, is to see somebody be truly at a loss and just have to figure it out. And that's where growth comes from, I think. And so to just be like, oh, I can't do this, but Moxie can, you know, is like, okay, sure. But what if Moxie wasn't there? Then you'd be stuck.
Yeah, it's kind of like having the Avengers,
right.
And it's like, oh, we're all capable. of solving this. And so, yeah.
So that's kind of how I'm viewing it. So while I don't think it's bad, and I don't think any character is bad, I'm not sitting here trying to be like, this character is bad or whatever. But I think that they're almost too good that there's not a ton of, like, there's nowhere for them to, like, go, for lack of better term.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want to see more flaw or more incompetence that has to be learned through,
right.
you know? The only other note that I have here is I do think that, so I like Kit Snicket because I'm a fan of the original series and she's one of my favorite characters in the original series. So I don't have an issue with the connection that Lemony's constantly talking about his sister. I also have not finished the series. I have not read the last book, so I don't really know how this resolves. But my recollection, or my assumption, not recollection, my assumption is that will come to pass in some way that's satisfying and makes sense. So just to address your note from earlier. But the best way that they did fan service in this entire book was bringing in the character of Widdershins.
Yeah, they did that in the last book too.
I know.
They brought in, who is it they brought in?
Monty. I think it's Monty.
Was it Monty?
Now I'm gonna look like a fool. It's been
a while,
2.5 years since I read that book.
I think
it's Monty. They brought in.
I think I don't know.
I don't remember.
I thought it was the guy from the Airsats elevator they brought in.
Jerome?
Maybe not.
Jerome Squalor?
No,
I don't think it was him.
No.
I think it's Monty.
No, who's the guy with the hot air balloon?
Hector. It's Hector.
That's what I thought. I was thinking. I thought Hector was in the Airsats elevator, but no,
he's in the Val Village.
It was Hector.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. It was Hector in the first book. Widdershins in this book, and I think that's the perfect way to do. Service.
I agree. I will concur with you on that. I think that is a better fan service as a little cameo in there that fits the story. I do think it's still a little pandering because it's like, what was the point of them being there?
I will say that, like, it's a little bit of a stretch that they're even there, but I think if you're going to do fan service, it's the way to do it. It's a way to kind of have a conversation with Lemony outside of the context of Staying by the Sea. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like step back, bigger picture of like who Lemony is and what he's
in the organization.
In. Right.
The organization
so I think that's just like the perfect way to do fan service. So that was my last note on characters. So that was 2 out of 3 points for me.
Cool. This is going to be a long episode. I'm surprised how long we're
at an
going
hour
here.
18.
Yeah. So probably a little shorter for you, but sorry, not sorry. Hope you're still here. Hope you didn't click off. But okay. So characters, I gave off half a point, took off half a point. So you already know I didn't give it full points, but I gave this 1.5 points out of 3. Overall, I agree with the majority of what you said. I do think, like how you said lack of growth, I think a lot of these characters are just very flat. Like you said, like they go in and they come out of the other side the exact same person. They don't have a lot of depth. I also think we don't find out a lot about any of them because like you mentioned, there's a huge cast of characters and the majority of them, we know nothing about them except the context of their relationship to maybe some of our other characters, which again, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think they serve their purpose. Like, for example, I really liked the Cleo Knight's parents and Zora and Zara. I thought they were all very interesting and dynamic in the way that they fleshed out Cleo's world. So Cleo's missing. We can't know anything about her because she's not present and Lemony Snicket hasn't met her yet. So in the context of the narrative story, we don't know anything about Cleo except of what we know about her based on what Cleo's parents, Dr. Flammarion and Zora and Zara, what we have witnessed in their relationship and their relationship with Cleo. So I think that in that sense, those characters are very interesting because they add to the character of Cleo. And I think in any kind of missing persons case, that's the only way you're going to get to know and care about the missing person is what are the kinds of people that she touched. Same with Jake Hicks.
Yeah.
We don't particularly learn a lot about him except his relationship to Cleo,
Right.
which gives us more information about Cleo and gives us more reason to want her to be found.
Right.
So in that sense, I think some of these minor characters are very interesting, but they're very interesting in that they flesh out who our priority characters should be, someone like Cleo. So I think that's a positive as far as using those characters with good purpose. Although I would also concede that they're not very deep characters, but that's also not their purpose. So
Right.
I think that's neither a negative nor a positive, but they serve their purpose very well, kind of like what you mentioned. I'm going to I already kind of touched on the cops, and how I thought from a plot point, I didn't like that. From a character point, I also didn't really like that. Because again, we've learned that these two parents have a son who is like pure evil. He's like the Carmelita Spatz
Yes.
of this story.
Yes.
If you know, you know. So, and these two parents think he's wonderful, and they do nothing to actually help Lemony in his job. They just dismiss him and treat him like he's a dumb child, even though they're dumb, bumbling cops. Again, I think it's a really big trope, but then because of that, we've highlighted on that in the first book, we've highlighted it again in this book, and then all of a sudden, Lemony Snicket says that the Mitchums are good people, and that's why he wants to recruit them to help him. It seems so out of left field. It seems completely inconsistent with them as characters. Or Lemony's just being duped. Like, is he desperate? Is he naive? Like, again, because we don't particularly know much about Lemony in that first person narrator perspective, like I kind of mentioned, we don't know why he is even saying this. Like, it would be one thing if we had more of that transparency of our narrator that like, oh, these two are kind of bumbling idiots, but I see they're doing the best they can because of my memory of fill in the blank of my past, and connecting that would give us a little more perspective into who Lemony is as a person. And that would also make sense why he thinks, you know what, maybe these cops really are good people and they're just trying to do their job and they're just incompetent, and maybe they could help me. Maybe they could possibly help me because I'm desperate. We don't get any of that. We get this one-off statement of Lemony saying, they're good people. Maybe they'll help me. And it kind of comes out of nowhere. It just seems way out of left field. And I just don't... I think that they're just very overdone, overused stereotypes, and they're really not interesting. And there are kind of our main like antagonists of the story, because Hangfire's this kind of villain in the tower. And yeah... did I say that right? Hangfire's this like villain in the tower, and then Dr. Flammarion's this kind of like evil scientist villain that we don't really interact with a lot in the story. So for our main antagonist to be these overplayed, like worn out stereotypes of the dumb bumbling cops, I think that's just really low hanging fruit, and I'm not really a big fan of it. I think that Lemony Snicket as an author is way more creative and could have come up with a better like antagonist than bumbling cops. But that's, so that was one factor I kind of took into characters here. The other character I really don't like at all is S. Theodora Markson. She just continues to be this dumb, incompetent adult trope that Lemony Snicket writes a lot into his stories, which I think you could argue that the only people reading this series have read A Series of Unfortunate Events and are coming here from that. And I think at this point, it's tired and overplayed to have a character like S. Theodora Markson even in this story. I feel like she only serves the purpose of adding another antagonist to like get in Lemony Snicket's way, which she doesn't for this whole story. So she doesn't serve that purpose at all. Or to maybe be a foil to show how smart Lemony is because she's so dumb. Again, I feel like that's kind of unnecessary. Is she just in there to get in the way and to slow down the progress of Lemony solving this case? So would this case have been solved really quickly if she wasn't constantly getting in everybody's way? Is that her purpose? Or is she literally just there to just have... Is it like the dead mom trope that like, well, we can't have Lemony Snicket, we can't have an almost 13-year-old alone, unchaperoned in its city solving mysteries, so he has to have a guardian or a chaperone with him, so let's make it this big this dumb bumbling adult so that they won't get in the way, and then Lemony can solve the mysteries all by himself because his guardian or chaperone won't let him. Like, he's not even apprenticing because he doesn't have any mentor to like. So it's almost like, again, I feel like that with the Officers Mitchum is both like really low hanging fruit. And I think that at this juncture in Lemony Snicket's like stories and world building, we don't need it. Like, it's not necessary. We can all accept and have some suspension of disbelief that this is a magical imaginary town where children are allowed to just frolic free and fight crime on their own. And like, I think we're all like very willing to accept that. We don't need an excuse of these incompetent adults to just be the hat hook on the wall that we just have to have there. Otherwise, we can't explain why a 12-year-old's running around town by himself. Yeah. But we still have a 12-year-old running around town by himself.
Right.
Like, anyways, so I really didn't like either of those characters at all. I think they're completely unnecessary to the story, and they're just, to me, I think they're overplayed, overdone, and kind of infuriating when you're trying to just like, I just want to find out how Lemony Snicket and his friends are solving the mystery. Like, I don't care if these adults even exist. Like, you could write them out, and I think the story would be more enjoyable. But that's part of my personal taste. But I do think objectively, storytelling and character development, it kind of falls into that as well. I kind of already touched on the Doctor as a villain, and I think it's a great villain concept. I think Hangfire, I like that we finally see him on stage for this, and he's no longer this kind of mysterious off-screen villain. He still is slightly mysterious because we don't know what he looks like, and we still see a little bit more demonstration of his abilities and how like sinister he is as far as what his plans are. So I think Hangfire has become a really good villain. I think that if we kept him as an off-screen villain, he would be really bland and boring. So I like that we finally get to kind of see what he's up to. I think that with some of the minor characters, I think QWERTY, Pip, and Squeak, I like that they're consistent. They're nice allies to our protagonist character, kind of our main cast. They're nice, like, assistive characters, and I think it kind of it does, I think, like you mentioned, it kind of gives a little bit of an Avenger trope. It's like, oh, well, how's Lemony Snicket going to travel across town? Let's
Pip and Squeak can get him there.
Yep, we got some taxi drivers. So
oh no, we need to know more about this thing. Let's go see QWERTY at the library. You know what I mean?
Right. So there are a little bit like plot convenience characters, but I do think they're pleasant and enjoyable. Jake Hicks as well. I think he's a really interesting character in the sense that he gives us more information about Cleo. And I do like the contrast that we have this. I think it's a very interesting contrast between him and Polly Partial, that both of them are lying. That Lemony's perspective is that both of them are lying, but yet why do we think that Polly Partial is like in the wrong and Jake Hicks is a good person? And so this kind of, even though Lemony Snicket suspects that he's not telling the truth about Cleo, like, but for some reason with Lemony, we feel that there is reason to trust him and think that there's good in him that will be revealed as we go on. I like that there's this little bit of a thread in his character where we're not sure if we can trust him, but we want to believe that we can. And I think that is portrayed in Jake Hicks really well. Cleo, I think that even though for somebody who's off screen so much, I like that we learn a lot about her through those secondary characters. And then when we do finally meet her, she lives up to those expectations. So those are kind of all I really have for our kind of side characters. I'm going to kind of touch on the main characters now. I don't have a ton to say about Moxie other than kind of echoing what you said. One thing with Moxie I like that she's kind of vying to be Lemony Snicket's partner and not just like, I'm the press, I'm going to follow you around and write stuff down. She actually wants to help him in things and is willing to be in danger to help him. She doesn't want to just be left aside or stuck somewhere in a corner to like stay safe somewhere else. I also like that she doesn't trust Ellington and doesn't approve of Lemony's, and I don't mean this romantically, but his attraction to Ellington as an individual, because she doesn't trust Ellington, and that all happens without there being a extremely big trope of a love triangle.
Right.
There's no indication that Moxie has any romantic interest in Lemony Snicket. She sees him as this intelligent, valuable character, and she wants to help him because he's working towards a good goal, and she wants to help him in that. And yet she kind of has this mistrust of Ellington because of Ellington's deeds. It's not that she sees herself in competition with Ellington.
Right.
And I feel like that would have been, again, a really low-hanging fruit, a really easy out. And I think it's a direction a lot of authors would have gone to. But I like that, and this is kind of props to Lemony Snicket, I like that Lemony Snicket gives us male and female characters in the same age bracket working together in kind of quote unquote close proximity, and that can occur without any romance involved. And I appreciate that in a story because not all relationships, especially in kids, but in adults too, not all relationships have to have a romantic undertone.
Right.
You can just have good, like, colleagues or friends working together towards a common goal, and it doesn't have to be, oh, it's just because there's romance.
Right.
So I appreciated that a lot about these characters. Ellington, I like that kind of, you said, we kind of like we talked about earlier, we don't see a lot of growth in her. I like that we learn about more of her motive. I think it's very interesting that she's helping Cleo, which seems to be counterintuitive to the character we've seen her. We've seen her as this very like self-serving, one-track mind, gonna save my father, like I don't care about anyone else. And now here she is helping Cleo, which is somebody that really she should have no interest in helping. But then we finally kind of unveil as we go, she is very much the end justifies the means individual. And she maintains that consistency in the story. And I like that about her because it gives her a little bit of moral ambiguity, if you will. And I think that makes for an interesting character. And then Lemony finds her, interesting, and he sees her as a valuable member of his team because she has these really impressive, skills and motives and abilities, and she's smart, but he doesn't see her as like, oh, she's my best friend. He just finds her to be he's very curious about her, and he's willing to trust her, even though someone like Moxie looks at her and goes, this person's bad news.
Yeah.
And I like that we have both of those perspectives of Ellington as a character, and we as the reader can kind of decide for ourselves how we feel about Ellington. We're not spoon-fed, oh, you should trust her or you should hate her. It's just, I like that we're given this ambiguity about her enough that we as the reader can decide. And I like that about her. I think I read, when I was making the fact sheet, it had like a list of how a book will have a list of like keywords, like for this book in particular, it's like noir, mystery novel, children's books, and one of them was femme fatale, and I was like, that's Ellington. That's Ellington's character. She is the femme fatale of this story. That's true. I think that Lemony Snicket, the author, maintains that pretty consistently in the story. Again, it doesn't give her much growth or depth per se, but I think that's not her purpose in the story. Finally, I'm going to touch on Lemony. I did kind of touch a little bit in the last category. One thing about Lemony, it's not until chapter 4 that we get some introspection and some insight, and that's revealed to us in his dialogue with Moxie. So his kind of thought process and his ability, we don't learn anything about what's going on inside his head until he is having dialogue with Moxie. And I think that information we're given is good and very interesting, but kind of like I said earlier, you would expect to be getting that as you go, learning what your first-person narrator is telling you as the first-person narrator. So I wish that we had a little bit more of that information. The other thing with Lemony that I think is pretty lacking as our protagonist is we don't really see a lot of his personality at all until we have these weird, it's not weird as in bad, but these surprising moments where I think it's on page 56. I think it's Hungry tells him not to be a smart aleck.
Yeah, so the dialogue goes like this if you'd like me to read it.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon, she said, being hungry. I said the same thing. I'm hungry, she said. Well, you're probably in the right place. She gave me a frown and a menu. No, I mean, I'm hungry. It's my name, Hungry Hicks. I own this place. Are you hungry? No, I said. You are. Don't be a smart aleck, Hungry said. but it cheers me up, I said.
Right. So here we have this moment, these kind of dialogue moments that are external to our narrator, where those are the moments where we see Lemony Snicket's personality. Like, it feels very light and like lighthearted compared to the very morose, melancholy narrator of A Series of Unfortunate Events of the adult Lemony Snicket. Here we have this young Lemony Snicket who enjoys being a smart aleck. Like, and he makes these kind of jokes back and forth, and yet we never get that from his internal dialogue.
Right.
We only see those aspects of him when he is, as the narrator, transcribing dialogue back and forth with other people. And again, I think as an author, if that's how you want to tell your story, you have every right to do that as an author. But I think that we need more of those moments in our narrator's head to get, so that when we see these moments where Lemony's really clever and he is kind of a smart aleck and he likes being a smart aleck and he's funny, like, we can have we don't have any of that internally as we're learning Lemony Snicket as our narrator. We only get that when we're reading a transcription of dialogue, which to me is an external picture of our narrator. That's the fly on the wall picture of our narrator versus the internal picture of our narrator. So I do think there's room for more with Lemony as the kind of main character of our story. But up to this point, he's really been like a kind of a working narrator. He's been really pensive. He's not really a full person. As our narrator, he's just telling us the facts of the case, if you will. And I think that because this is written in first person, we should be getting more of that depth as we go and not waiting until he has this wonderful dialogue with Ellington where they go back and forth and they have really interesting conversations. And same with Moxie. I think his dialogues between Lemony and Moxie and Lemony and Ellington reveal a lot about Lemony as a character, but that's the only time we get it, is when he is speaking aloud to another character. And I think that we should have more of that revealed as we go. So because of that, and because Lemony is our main character, he's the protagonist of our story, I think that it's still a bit lacking in depth for Lemony, where we have full opportunity to get the deepest knowledge of him because we're inside his head the whole time. That, and then S. Theodore Markson and the cops definitely are the biggest reasons that I couldn't give it full points. In addition to kind of what you already mentioned, I don't think we see a lot of growth in these characters as a whole. I think they all serve their purpose in the story very, very well, and that they're not confusing. I love that we don't ever have moments where I can't remember who's talking or who's in this scene. There's no chaos in keeping these people straight. But I think it's just not fully there, especially when you compare it to, like, this scoring system is for all books. And I think that even in this age demographic, it could be there could be a little bit more. So in a way, I think that maybe in the same way this book gave me more than what I was hoping for in the last book, maybe the next book will also just kind of build even more depth there. But 1.5 points out of 3, so half credit for characters for me.
Okay. So our fourth category is personal taste and preference, which is across the board a category that we do for every category. We always allot up to 2 points for this. And surprise, surprise, I gave this 2 full points.
Wow, what a surprise.
I know. I just love Lemony Snicket. I think everything about this series and A Series of Unfortunate Events is just like the kind of book that I really just enjoy reading. It may not be perfect, and I'm not trying to claim that it is, but I think that in a way I have so much attachment, nostalgia, and like just genuine affection for like his style of mystery books. I would say that A Series of Unfortunate Events also has a healthy dose of mystery, even though I think the All the Wrong Questions series is much more mystery, like packaged and delivered. So I don't have a lot to say. I'm not going to beat, a point, just that it's everything that I want in a book. Even just like the humor notes, and it just checks all the boxes for me as a reader. And these are books that I don't get tired of rereading. I read A Series of Unfortunate Events over again every 3 to 4 years, and I have yet to get tired of them. So I think that will probably stay the same through the rest of my life as long as I have eyes to read. And while I don't read All the Wrong Questions consistently like that, everything about it's like the feel and the voice is the same. And so because of that, it just feels so familiar and like cozy in that way. So I just, as far as personal taste goes, this is my personal taste. So.
Alrighty. So for personal taste and preference, out of a total possible score of 2, I give this 1 out of 2 points. Overall, I enjoyed this book much better than its predecessor. I felt the flow and pacing were better and the plot was a lot more engaging. I do still feel that the characters are pretty hit or miss, and I think there's a bit of I think it's a bit fan service-y in a sense. And some of the characters and plots, I think it falls flat in a few places. For a book that's trying to take itself really seriously, I think that I don't know. I almost feel like I've read A Series of Unfortunate Events. I do enjoy those books. They're not my favorite books of all time. It's like Tori grew up reading A Series of Unfortunate Events. I grew up reading Hatchet. I mean, like, it's just
we are not the same.
We're not the same person. So this book, I love a good mystery. I'm not gonna lie. Sherlock Holmes I'm a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes stories. Those are the mystery stories I grew up reading, was The Great Detective. I read like abridged kids versions of those books when I was really young. I thought I was going to be a detective when I grew up. So I love the mystery genre. It's just, I think that maybe my tastes are more mature. Not really. That was just a joke. But I think that the kinds of mysteries that I enjoy are just different. And I do think Lemony Snicket is a good writer. And I enjoyed this book. I wouldn't say by any means that I disliked it, but it's just out of 2 points for personal taste, this just isn't something I would like pick off the shelf and read every few years. But I did genuinely enjoy reading it for this podcast and kind of prepping for it. So I figured about half points was pretty accurate for me. So 1 out of 2.
Okay. Our last category, as we do with every topic that we do, is creativity. So for books, we allow 1 full point. I gave this half a point. This is obviously, as I've stated, incredibly consistent in Snicket style. However, I don't think it is the most like unpredictable, jaw-dropping, mind-blowing wow factor compared to some of his other like works. I think that the plot delivers everything it should and does so better than it did in the first book. However, I don't think it's anything like crazy creative, especially knowing Snicket as I do and knowing his capacity for creative. I think that all the creativity is there, and I think the creativity is always present because of who he is in the style and how he presents things. And I talked a lot about that in quality of writing, and just like the vocabulary I think is always creative. I'm not trying to say it's not creative, but I'm kind of comparing this as a fan of Snicket, the author, knowing his capabilities. I don't think this necessarily hits the bar of excellence that I know he's capable of, or that we see in other books that he's written. I also wanted to talk about in this category, I felt like this was probably the place to talk about it, is the illustrations found in the book. I'll just kind of like show the cover again, but it's a very distinct style, and I think it fits really well with the kind of book this is, which, like you said, there is a noir sort of filter over this without feeling like a dark, depressive, violent kind of noir that you could find in like in films that started the genre, or
even in like some comic book series that follow in the noir genre.
I think
they could be really, really dark.
Yeah. So I think this book, while it has those sorts of undertones or kind of curtain over everything, it does so in an age-appropriate way, in a way that still has lots of humor and fun and light moments in it. And I think that's reflected really well in how the thing and how illustrations are, where everything is very noir. As we can see, there's lots of silhouettes, sort of these shadowy, but then each book in the series kind of has like its overarching color. So there's still color present. And for this book, it's a lot of purples and greens. Purples and greens are kind of the present.
I think the first one's blue and the second one's
blue,
second
and
one's
this
purple.
one's very purple. And so it's like we have all these little nice illustrations that feel like true to the world, and they're very consistent, and I think they're very clever. And it's very different than the style of illustrations found in A Series of Unfortunate Events. And I think both sets of illustrations feel very Snicket still at the same time. And I think it's just kind of like the taste, of this series is a little different than the taste of A Series of Unfortunate Events. And I think the illustrations are just really great. The illustrator goes by Seth. I don't know if there's a last name.
I don't think so. Seth. I think he just goes
by Seth.
Yep.
So Seth is the illustrator, and I just think he kind of nails it. And I think that's just worth talking about. But because I don't think this is the best that Snicket can do in regards to creativity, and I do think that this series is not quite as iconic or milestone-y as A Series of Unfortunate Events turned out to be, I felt more comfy giving it half a point instead of the full point.
Okay. All right, so for creativity, I'm probably going to get a ton of hate for this, and I'm sorry, but not really, because I can do what I want. I gave this 0 points.
Wow, okay.
For creativity. I'll just read what I wrote, because I wrote a little paragraph, if you will. I think these books are a good continuation of Lemony Snicket's world, but I don't know if it does anything fresh or different. It follows a lot of the same structure, ambiguity, villains, mystery, macabre tone, etc. as the original series. Although I applaud the author for continuing his story on his terms and commend him on his commitment to his world and fandom, I don't think this story paves a new path that wasn't already made by his prior works. So what I kind of mean by that is I think that A Series of Unfortunate Events absolutely broke the mold of a specific kind of children's novel.
Oh yeah, there was nothing else like it when it came out.
However, I don't think that mystery books for kids is a new genre.
No.
And I don't think that this book, I think this series intentionally borrows a lot of tropes from classic mystery stories, like the Maltese Falcon. The Abominating Beast is the Maltese Falcon, just retold, repackaged a little bit. Kind of like you said, like the assumed identity trope, a missing persons mystery. All of those stories have been told before, and those stories have been told to children before. But I think that Lemony Snicket, as an author, has every right to continue the story of the world that he created in A Series of Unfortunate Events, has every right to continue that story however he chooses. But I don't think this book series necessarily does anything new for children's literature that wasn't already accomplished from A Series of Unfortunate Events. And perhaps this is controversial to say, I don't think if A Series of Unfortunate Events never existed, this series would never have taken off the ground.
I actually agree.
So, I mean, I think that the fact that I think he is very smart, and I don't think in any way, please hear me, I'm not saying in any way that this is a gimmick or that he is just selling out or that he is just capitalizing on a fandom. I don't think that is true at all. I do believe that Lemony Snicket is telling this story the way he wants it to be told, but I do think he was very smart in continuing his story by telling Lemony Snicket's childhood story, because that's what the fans of the original series of unfortunate events wanted.
Right.
What the fans have always wanted is to know more about Lemony Snicket and his siblings.
Right.
Learn about the Snicket family after they've finished learning about the Baudelaire family.
Right.
And so I think that because that's what the fans wanted, I think that Lemony Snicket was very smart to just tell that story and to tell it his way, on his terms, with his genre.
Yeah.
This is a new genre for him, technically, but it still feels like it fits his world, and I think that's all well and good. But I think that credit goes to our very first category of storytelling, world building, developing this world. And I think that way was paved by the original series. So for that reason, I don't think it merits the credit for creativity. I think that credit for creativity goes to the original series.
I fully agree. I think you just said it better than I did.
Oh, no, it's all good. So what was your final score for All the Wrong Questions Book 2? When Did You See Her Last by Lemony Snicket?
8 out of 10.
Wow.
Yeah. Much better than last time. I think I was like a 6 or something for the last book.
My score was 5.5 out of 10.
Okay.
Which is quite
Still
a bit lower
than the last time.
It is much better than the last book. I think the last book
I think you were like 4.
was a 4, so it's 5.5. So I mean, it's better. But I think your personal taste.
It's my Snicket love. I mean, genuinely, like I'll fully admit that I don't think my score would be that high if my own personal attachment to Snicket as an author and like the world he's built and created, if that was missing, my score would probably be like pretty much yours. So,
well, no, because you're still objective.
True, but I just mean that
your score would have been, what was your score? 8. Your score would have been 7.
That's true.
If we scored the same for personal taste.
That's true.
So. And you gave credit for creativity, and I didn't,
True.
but I don't think either of us are wrong
right
in making that call. I think it's just perspective.
That's fair.
So
that's why we do this.
That's why we do the show. Are you ready for some lightning round
Yes.
questions?
Let's
okay.
do it.
Favorite character total overall?
I feel like I'm gonna have a really basic answer.
Go ahead.
Moxie.
Yeah.
I love Moxie.
I knew that was gonna be your answer.
I like Moxie. What's the news, Moxie?
Uh-huh. I think my favorite character is still Ellington. I just think she's very interesting.
She is.
Even though she's kind of this...
What's funny is that, like, what you were saying earlier about how the audience is kind of given both Moxie and Lemony's perspective on Ellington and let to choose their... I feel like I kind of hold Moxie's perspective. We're like, I don't trust you.
Yeah.
Like, you might be smart and clever and cool, but I still don't know if you wouldn't sell somebody out, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Least favorite character?
Stu Mitchum.
Yeah.
I hate that kid.
He's horrible.
I hate that kid.
You know who
if I could punch a kid through paper, it would be Stu Mitchum.
It'd be Stu Mitchum. Slap him with his own slingshot.
I don't condone violence against children. Let me clarify.
He's not real.
He's fiction.
No real children.
If I was a child like
Lemony,
then I would maybe. Okay, anyway.
Moving on. You know who I hate even more than Stu Mitchum?
Who?
S. Theodora Marks.
Okay, that's fair.
She's beyond obnoxious.
She's just so pointless a lot of the time.
So annoying. Most underrated side or minor character?
Dashiell Qwerty.
That's fair.
Yeah, I think he's cool. I think he knows a lot more than he lets on. And I like that he isn't overbearing. And he kind of just like comes in and is like, let me know if you need anything. And is helpful when he needs to be helpful. And lets Lemony be when he wants to be left alone. And
But that's kind of a librarian's job.
I guess so, but I would wager that, you know.
And the library is free.
Yeah, but it's not like he's busy.
He's just doing his job.
I like him anyway. You try to bully me. My choices.
Well,
fine. I like Dashiell Qwerty. He's a librarian, and I think that's neat.
You just like his spiky hair.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. You got me.
That's it.
Yeah, and his leather jacket.
Yep. You just have a thing for guys in leather jackets.
That's it. You caught me.
Grease was your favorite movie.
And if they were a librarian, my type.
There you go.
Let's go.
Okay. This is getting a little weird here. I think the most underrated side character, minor character, is hungry. Because she lets those kids hang out at her diner and they don't pay for their food.
True. And for a town that's basically dying.
Yeah. She got to pay the bills. You know? All right. Do you have a favorite or a least favorite story moment from this book? Either or. You could be and or. Favorite, least favorite.
I just really I mentioned it earlier, but I just think it's so fun and funny when Snicket comes back to the library after ditching Moxie, and she's just like so angry at him. And he kind of explains what happens, and she's still kind of angry with him, but just sort of like understands and like moves on. And I know it sounds like so insignificant, but I just think maybe it's just because I'm such a Moxie fan, but I just think it's like just like a really fun moment in the story, and kind of gives a little bit of like levity in between two kind of like heavy chapters. So I think it's kind of like just like a nice almost like breather moment before we get back into some of the hard stuff. So it's like we got tense moment, and it's kind of heavy with like finding Ellington and all, and figure out what the stakes actually are. Then you get that kind of moment of brightness again, and it's kind of humorous, and then they go back into sort of a tough situation. So I just think it's like just like a nice moment, nice little hilltop in between the two valleys. So
cool. I think my favorite part, like when I was reading it, I really liked it, was that the moment where Lemony Snicket goes to the Colonel's room, and he walks in the room and he's describing what's in the room, and all of that are clues,
right,
to let you figure out that this isn't really the Colonel, it's Hangfire.
Yeah. And
even at the beginning when Lemony Snicket is whistling the gramophone tune, and he hears a voice, and it's Hangfire pretending to be Ellington's father. And so at that point, you know something's not right. And then when you get in the room, you find out it's really not the Colonel, it's actually Hangfire. And all of those clues along the way, if you as the reader were observant enough and you remembered what you knew about the Colonel, you could figure it out.
It's a really satisfying like lead in.
Yeah. And so that was I love when I think a mystery that does that gives you the answer in front of your face, and then you just had to have paid attention.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to reveal a mystery.
For sure.
What's your favorite Snicket quip from this book?
Oh.
It could either be narrator or dialogue. Snicket.
It's kind of long though, but I'm going to read it anyway. Theodore had an impressive vocabulary, which can be charming if it is used at a convenient time. But if you are in a great hurry and someone uses something like skip tracer, which you are unlikely to understand, then impressive vocabulary is quite irritating. Another way of saying this is that it is vexing. Another way of saying this is that it is annoying. Another way of saying this is that it is bothersome. Another way of saying this is that it is exasperating. Another way of saying this is that it is troublesome. And it just goes on for like
just synonyms for like the whole page. Yep,
and I
remember that.
Reading this and being like, this is so ridiculous.
Yeah, let me see.
Oh, sorry.
My favorite quip, I can't remember where it is in the book, but he uses the word asinine, and he says something like, asinine sounds like a word that you're not supposed to say, or something like that. And then he tells you what it means.
Yeah, it's very funny though.
I thought that was pretty clever, especially I feel like it's very age appropriate because little kids are going to think that it's really funny.
It's good like preteen humor, you know?
Yeah.
So,
next question. If you could cast some of our new characters, first thoughts on any actors you would pick?
Oh.
Do you want me to tell you mine?
Yeah.
I would go animated.
Okay.
And I would pick a voice actor to play Nurse Dander, the nurse. And I would pick Greta Lyle, who voices Azula in Avatar The Last Airbender, as the nurse.
Yeah, she would do good.
I think that would be a really good, good character. Or a good actress to play that character. especially when she's like coming up the stairs. She's like yelling for who she thinks is Cleo and Ellington, and she's like looking around the apartment and stuff for her. And I think it'd be really scary.
So he might be a little old at this point, but Jake Hicks could be played really well by like Joe Keery. Yeah. I could see Joe Keery doing Jake Hicks.
Yeah. I don't think he would necessarily be too old because, he plays like a teenager in Stranger Things.
True.
So, and Jake Hicks and Cleo are supposed to be older than...
Yeah, I think the implication at least is that they're supposed to be like 18, 19.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. They're like almost out of like high school age for sure. All right. Last question. So this is kind of like a fun fact related question. So one thing in the Lemony Snicket series is that and you might want to pull up on your screen, pull up my lightning round questions. So one thing I think is really fun is in the All the Wrong Questions books, Lemony Snicket references a bunch of real world novels, and most of them are children's novels. So I found a list of some of them, and a couple weren't listed online, so I actually kind of filled it in. So these are some of the books, most of the books that are referenced in this story, and I'm going to read them, the title and the author, and then kind of where they're referenced. So for you listeners, you can find these in the story for yourself if you would like to. But of these books, of the following books, which of these books have you read, is your favorite, or you would like to read? So, and I will read them. The Trolley to Yesterday by John Bellairs, and that was mentioned in Chapter 3. Jake is reading that book. To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. In Chapter 3, Snicket mentions this book to the Pippin Squeak. The Headless Cupid by Zilpha Keatley Snyder. In Chapter 6, Snicket mentions this book to Pippin Squeak again. Despair by Vladimir Nabokov. In Chapter 6, QWERTY recommends this book. Harriet the Spy, The Long Secret and Sport by Louise Fitzhugh. These books are referenced in the previous All the Wrong Questions novel, and those are the books that are returned to the library in Chapter 6. Pippi Longstocking by Astrid Lindgren. In Chapter 7, Snicket mentions the book to Ellington Fate. The Iliad by Homer. In Chapter 9, Snicket references the story, and Ellington says that her father had been unable to finish reading it to her before his capture. The Witch of Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Spear. In Chapter 10, Snicket describes the plot and mentions the main character's name as Kit, who shares a name with someone who likes the book even more than he does. And then Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. In Chapter 12, Cleo references the book while describing her capture.
Okay, so I have read Pippi Longstocking, The Witch of Blackbird Pond, and Jane Eyre. I would say my favorite of those three is probably The Witch of Blackbird Pond. I don't remember it super clearly, but I do remember enjoying it. I read it as a teenager, probably 13 or 14, I'd say. Would I like to read? I don't know. I feel like everybody at some point should read the Iliad and the Odyssey, so that would probably be my pick for should read.
Cool. I actually have read Pippi Longstocking. I read the Iliad. I think I read The Witch of Blackbird Pond, but I don't remember it at all. I think I read it in middle school. I have not read Jane Eyre. And I never read the Harriet the Spy books either, which I know were really popular when I was growing up. Of those, I think my favorite, I really remember enjoying Pippi Longstocking as a story.
It's a fun story.
I remember enjoying that one a lot. And one that I would like to read, I'm not familiar enough with any of the other, like any of the first few books that I've read that I mentioned. Probably I would like to read The Witch of Blackbird Pond because I just don't remember it, and I remember it being a really good story. Or at very least hearing it's a very good story.
Yeah.
So there's your fun facts. Some books you can add to your reading list that Lemony Snicket thinks you should probably read. Any final thoughts?
Nope.
Okay.
I love Lemony Snicket.
If you couldn't tell.
Yeah, you couldn't tell.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode. We hope you had a good time. We sure did. If you have an idea of what we should review next, you can leave us a comment or use our suggestion box on lionandmousepodcast.com, where you can find links to our show notes, Patreon, socials, all the fun stuff. If you could review this episode wherever you listen to your podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do all the YouTube things like comment, subscribe, all the fun stuff. All of that really helps us reach as many people as we can, and it just helps support us in any way you can. It doesn't cost you anything. So we appreciate all the support you guys have given us. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will catch you in the next one.